This is an article that I call Abstinence Does Not Equal Recovery. I'll be doing a combination of reading and talking about some of the things that I've written in this article. So if you're reading along, you might notice that I go off the script a bit. But I would like to be able to talk a little bit about what went behind the article and other thoughts beyond what I wrote in the article. So here we go. There's so much more to recovery than just abstinence. Clean and sober is a great start. That puts you in the waiting room for recovery. I'd never heard anybody talk about it in that particular way, but years after, I found that there was a difference between just not drinking and recovery. That awareness came from beginning to learn how to go inside. And I'll say more about that in this article. But I was 20 years sober before that happened. So let's just imagine you've managed to abstain. I hope that's true for you if you're trying to recover. Some things have gotten better, sure, but some things haven't changed at all. And if you're like me, you might have things that have gotten even worse. I wondered, wasn't abstinence supposed to solve all the problems? I was really hoping that my problem with alcohol was the cause of all the other problems. The good news is that while abstinence is a great start, recovery involves healing. I've been clean and sober for now over 42 years. The article says 40 years, so that tells you how old this article is. It's been a couple of years since I wrote it. But I didn't start to recover until I started to heal. Here's my story. My drug of choice was alcohol. I stopped using cannabis 3 years before I stopped drinking because my wife said she would leave me if I didn't stop smoking pot. That was hard. I loved smoking pot. But the fear of losing my wife and my kids was just unbearable, so I stopped. I used, and they called it cross-tops back in these days. I was 19 years old. Do the math. I was born in 55, so what is that, 1974? I was working in the grocery business. Somebody handed me some white pills with cross-tops on the top of it. Said, this will help you, because I was tired. Boy, did it make a difference. Oh, what is that? Wow. I used cross-tops for speed for about a year, but I stopped that because I couldn't sleep. Didn't want to eat and thought I was going crazy. I'll do it. Alcohol was my comfort. But I quit that too when my wife met some friends who were in recovery. Paul and Becky, that's not their real names, I'm just going to use that for this article, were both involved in 12-step programs. AA for Paul and Al-Anon for Becky. My wife, Lori, that was her real name, liked them and invited them to our home often. This was in the early 80s and we all smoked cigarettes, but I was the only one drinking alcohol. So of course I hated Becky and Paul for not drinking and making me feel so uncomfortable to be the only one there drinking. Lori started changing after she met Paul and Becky. She even started going to Al-Anon with Becky, where they taught her how to detach from me. God, I hated Becky and Paul. Scared sober. When Paul invited me to an AA meeting, I felt insulted. But because I was afraid Lori might leave me, I went with him. AA scared me even more with the idea that I had a disease that was going to kill me. Fear got me sober, and the camaraderie of the people in the meetings kept me sober long enough to find recovery. I really was scared. I really believed what I heard around the tables of AA, which was I had a disease, and that was alcoholism, and that if I ever drank again, I was putting myself at risk of actually dying. To drink is to die. It scared me. I believed enough of it. I believed it enough, I should say it this way, that I thought, well, I don't want to take that risk. So that fear actually kept me sober. But also the camaraderie of the people in the meetings. It was great to be able to be around people who, like me, were struggling with staying sober. So that was pretty nice, having others around me that also wanted to be or were struggling with getting and staying sober. So I felt some hope that being sober would solve all my secret problems I thought I was keeping to myself, but I still had my secrets and I still had my problems with a year of sobriety. I felt proud of my shiny medallion and the respect and recognition I got for the feat of staying sober that long. After a year without alcohol, I was out of the habit of drinking. I was spending less money, but I wasn't spending any more time at home. In fact, Lori and the kids probably saw less of me than before I stopped drinking. I attended up to 3 meetings a day and got my feel goods at the meetings and the meetings after the meetings. So my new addiction was the meetings. Even with some counseling and therapy, Lori and I struggled. We separated briefly and continued to work together on improving the marriage, but we struggled until the day she died of a brain tumor. I'd been sober for 7 years at that point and never even considered drinking again to deal with my grief. I found something even better than drinking for me to numb myself, and that was women. After a series of disastrous affairs, I realized I was binging on relationships and felt completely out of control. It actually felt as though I had no control. I had no choice. A part of me would occasionally surface and notice the chaos, but that part would soon be overridden by the numbing addiction of codependent relationships. This went on for 2 years and spanned 5 relationships over 2 years before I got married again. Not because I loved the woman I married. I got married because I was confident that if I got married, I would stop the crazy train. I knew my history as a married man. When I was married, I didn't cheat. I was no longer vulnerable to the numbing addiction to new relationships. So let me tell you about the crazy train. My second marriage lasted 9 years. We were both miserable. I survived every day of that marriage until I couldn't do it anymore and left. At that point, I was sober for 17 years. In fact, it was on my 17th anniversary that I left. I existed in a state of fear and self-doubt. How could I ever trust myself with women? I was afraid that even if I considered a relationship, I'd be back on the crazy train. So it was back to meetings again. I had all but stopped attending meetings because my second wife hated me for giving my attention to anything other than her. Feeling afraid and desperate, I returned to meetings but found that they no longer held the allure and appeal they once had. I had lost my recovery community in that time and had trouble finding the magic again. Another sober friend and I searched for other resources and support and were fortunate enough to find the work of Byron Katie, which taught me for the first time in my life how to go inside and take an honest look at what was happening in there. By learning her method for self-examination, I began to recover. Recovery began for me after I had been sober for 22 years. Developing the skill of self-awareness saved me from countless years of suffering. Eventually, I became a coach and began supporting my clients using the work of Byron Katie. I continued to do my own internal work and eventually was introduced to the internal family systems model, which changed everything. By the way, if you want to check out Byron Katie, go to thework.com. My recovery has been taken much deeper now since I discovered IFS. I now understand that I am recovering from my incomplete past. I'm recovering my true, authentic self and all of the and I'm recovering all the innate resources and qualities that are accessible when I show up as the real me. That's the challenge. That's the problem. How do you do that? How do you show up as the real me? And IFS has really helped you with that. Recovery is so much more than abstinence, but for some, recovery cannot happen at all without abstinence. I grew up in the recovery world learning that total abstinence must be achieved. When I say I grew up in the recovery world, my folks weren't in recovery. I was a kid, 27 years old when I got sober. I feel like I grew up in the recovery world and was learning that total abstinence must be achieved. But I've encountered many clients and others who found recovery without total abstinence. I believe the conditions to achieve recovery are the same conditions required to achieve internal healing of the past. Elements of those conditions include a clear mind and a sense of safety, hope, and the belief that recovery is possible. If you're interested in talking to me more about recovery, be sure and set up a 20-minute conversation with me. I'd love to have that conversation with you. Thanks for listening.